Hi, Ben here from 498 Nerf, and this is the build journal for the Hailstorm Mk.4. It's going to be built from a rapid strike and a strife, just like the other Hailstorm mods. But one thing, I've got a few things that changes, enhancements that I want to do with it. But one thing that I'm is going to be do with this mod, and this was kind of inspired by Tom from Phone Data Services, is I'm going to try to put this whole thing together without using any power tools. I am addicted to my Dremel, and I use it for everything. And I picked up a couple tools that I didn't have before, and there's a couple that I did have. I know I've got my saw and I've got my flat file, but I picked up a small triangle file and I picked up a miniaturized hacksaw. And those, in addition to sandpaper and the various other tools that I use, I'm going to use to try to do all my shell cuts and all the modifications for that. So we can see here my disassembled strife, and I took this thing completely apart. And I'm going to be using 4 of these components within the Hailstorm Mk.4. Obviously the flywheel cage and the flywheels go in, and I will use the magwell to hold a second clip on the side, the battery tray, and the top rail, and I'll use that to help cover up where the second flywheel motors come in. Now, this whole thing, all these cuts, I didn't use my Dremel, and this is a huge deal for me because, like I said before, I am immensely addicted to my Dremel. I use it for everything. So I use the handsaw, the hacksaw, and the files, and then some sandpaper to make all of these cuts and to pull all this together. Got all the cuts on the rapid strike completed, and also have the parts from the strife attached, the spare magwell. I've got the top rails right here and here, and I've got the battery box attached on the other side here. And again, I'm determined to do this without any power tools and without using my Dremel. And for the most part, these cuts out here did pretty well with the hand tools. In some cases, I think I like them a lot better doing the cuts with hand tools than I do with the Dremel. You just end up being more precise. This cut right here ended up being one that gave me a lot of difficulty because this notch has to be cut out, and I ended up, the sides were fine coming to the hacksaw, but I ended up having to come around the back side and get through it enough where I can get the hacksaw blade down through it and get it finished up. That one's a bit challenging. Also with these, you have to do some modifications, some sanding down of the shell right in this area because the motor hits against that if you don't. There's a rib you got to take out and you got to sand that down. And that was a place where I use my Dremel, and I would recommend next time I do it, I'm going to turn my Dremel back on and do it. I was able to kind of cut the ribbing out, move it, try to get a file in there a little bit. I ended up having to use 40 grit sandpaper just to take it down the rest of the way to get it in there where I needed to. So at this point, I've got the shell cuts all ready to go. I'm going to wire this thing up and plan on doing some testing with it. I finished the soldering work on the Mk.4. And you'll know, and first of all, I am not the world's neatest solderer. It doesn't look as pretty as other people could, but it's functional, it gets done, and I can solder, I can make good electrical connections, but I'm not going to make the prettiest connections. So with that in mind, though, I want to go over exactly how I set up this Mk.4. And it's set up electrically very similar to all the other Hailfire mods. Power comes in through XT60. That's going to eventually be plugged into a 4 IMR battery packs on the back side, but I'm also going to use a LiPo to do some testing with this. The negative, the black wire, I bring to a common point here and tie all of my grounds together. So I've got the ground coming in, I've got the ground for the flywheel cage motors, and I have the ground for the pusher motor all coming into this one point. It also connects into the switch, so it provides ground to well, I'll go through that, how the trigger mechanism works and thing. Power, I then take directly to this switch down here, which is the rev trigger switch. So the way I wire mine up, if the red trigger is not depressed, the entire circuit is cut. There is no power to anything in the blaster. So if you ever get a pusher motor crash or something that it's jammed up, if you let go of that rev trigger, it cuts the power off to everything. It's a rev trigger, but also kind of serves as a master cutoff for the thing. Then from the rev trigger, the output of it, there's two wires. One goes up to the motor cages, so when you hit the rev trigger, the motors come on. The other wire goes to here in this circuit, which is the switch that goes into the pusher motor mechanism, and it provides power to that point. Now, when the pusher motor rev switch is depressed, when you push that switch in, that puts power, connects it directly in, and causes the pusher mechanism to move constantly. So when the thing's down. Now, when the pusher, when the rev trigger is not, or not the rev trigger, the main trigger is not pressed, then it depends on the position of this switch here on the pusher. When the pusher is all the way back, it connects ground to the blue wire down to here into the motor. That short circuits the motor and causes it to break. It causes it to stop. When this pusher motor is out, when that pusher, not the pusher motor, when the pusher rod is out, that switch is up and it connects in power into this line and causes the pusher motor to move. So if the pusher motor is out, it will keep going until it gets back to a back position. And when it hits that back position, then it switches to a braking mode, stops the motor, and holds it there. And that's how you get that really nice, clean, crisp fire control on those, by moving it back when it's out of position and then braking it electrically by shorting out the motor when it's all the way, when it hits that back position. Anyways, I'm going to break this journal out into two parts. So this is going to conclude part one. I'm going to look at doing some testing. I've got some different setups that I want to try, and that I'll get to in the second part of this video.